Well, thanks for joining me today, Paul, and being on October's edition of, I don't know, Conversations with the Maryland Psychiatric Society. That's what we'll call it. Um, I wanted to have you here today in order to accompany the piece talking about ERPO laws in Maryland. And since you are one of our go-tos and certainly one of the nation's leading experts at this point regarding suicide prevention and firearm safety, I wanted to have you here today. So thank you for joining.
Thanks
And
for having me. Yeah,
medical director of the Center for Suicide Prevention at Hopkins Bloomberg School. But tell us a little bit about kind of your interest in suicide prevention, in particular surrounding gun safety and maybe gun restrictions as a means to accomplish that.
sure. So, I mean, as a psychiatrist, obviously, I'm very interested in suicide prevention just right off the bat. But as I, went through residency and fellowship, it became really clear that even though treating depression, obviously, treating psychiatric illness is the mainstay of what we do as far as suicide prevention, some of these policy-based things, especially regarding lethal means restriction, globally have been the most effective in actually reducing deaths. It's important to treat depression, it's important, but in terms of actually reducing suicide mortality, it says about lethal means. And in the United States, lethal means tends to mean guns. Most suicide deaths are gun deaths. Most gun deaths are suicides. And so that's where I found myself drawn in terms of the research.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thanks. As you saw from the written piece that was accompanying this, we're focusing on ERPO laws this year, or excuse me, this month. And as I said, there's been I don't know how many conversations I've had in the past month about ERPO laws. And as a forensic psychiatrist, I think people are asking me, and it struck me as in my work as a community psychiatrist, it's rare that ERPO laws come up. And I know that you've been working hard to have more utilization, more understanding, more thoughtfulness around ERPO laws. So maybe one, educate us a little bit about ERPO laws and talk a little bit about why we're having maybe some difficulty in more utilization.
Sure, sure. So ERPO laws, extreme risk protection order laws, sometimes called red flag laws, are relatively new. It's one of the reasons that many psychiatrists haven't heard about them. I mean, until 2018, only Connecticut and Indiana had laws like this. But in 2018, after the Parkland massacre, many states started passing laws like this. There's now 22 states and DC, U.S. Virgin Islands. When Maryland passed our version, which is called the Extreme Risk Protection Order Law in 2018, we were the first version to have clinicians able to be petitioners for these laws. What these laws do is when someone petitions, in Maryland, it could be a clinician, it could be a police officer, it could be a family member, they can have someone who they're worried about gun access. You know what, Ron? Let me try to say this shorter. Can I, since you're going to cut this, is that okay to do? Or should we not? Should I not have done that?
Oh, no. It's one take, Paul. It's one take.
Oh, no. Right. I should have asked if you do that. Well, let's include all this. So
let's include it all. Yeah. Hey, this is casual conversations.
Let me just say, in short, red flag laws are laws that exist so that if you're worried about your patient or your family member, or if you're worried about someone being a risk themselves or others, if they have access to a firearm, you can petition a judge to have that firearm temporarily removed. So in Maryland, that means for a year. And also they're put on the do not buy list. They can't buy another gun during that period.
Right.
And the idea is that it reduces acute risk, right? So it's not a permanent removal of someone's right to own a firearm, but during a risk period, when let's say they're in a depressive episode or recovering from one, that kind of thing can be really effective. And they've been proven to be very effective. There's been several studies that have shown that for every 10 to 20 guns taken away by an ERPO, one life is saved. In Indiana, they reduced firearm suicide by 7.5%. They're really effective.
Right.
However, physicians tend to not file them, as you said. The minority of them are filed by physicians, largely because physicians might not know about them. And we did a survey study of psychiatrists and pediatricians and emergency room doctors that was in JAMA Open. And they found that aside from not knowing about the ERPOs, even when they knew about them, they were unable to make time in their schedule to go to court. I think any clinician can relate to that. Like, you can't leave your unit, your ER, your clinical practice to spend the day in court to file one of these things. So it's unsurprising that only 2% of Maryland's ERPOs are filed by clinicians. What we're working to do is make it a little bit easier for clinicians to file. There's ways to change the law. Like, for instance, if administrative judges could be accept these petitions, that would make it easier because many inpatient doctors have access to them.
Right.
That's difficult. But what we can do is we can provide what we're calling gun violence navigators or gun safety navigators, depending on which hospital we're talking about, that go to hospitals within the Hopkins system so far and the Maryland system. So we're going to expand to the rest of the area soon. But so far, these navigators will go into these hospitals when they're called by a clinician to evaluate a patient themselves to determine if they might be a risk were they to have a gun. And then they'll make the call about how much of an intervention is warranted in that case. So it might be as simple as, hey, we're going to recommend that you lock your gun up because your spouse is in a crisis right now. And here we're going to give you a cable lock, or we're going to give you a lockbox. Or it might be, oh, this person's really at risk, extreme risk, it's right in the name. We're going to actually file a petition to have their gun removed. And then the navigator, who, by the way, these are social workers, the navigator will file that petition at court, let the clinician know, kind of close the loop, this is what's going on. And then also we're sort of evaluating what happens after that. We actually have a study where we're then later interviewing the respondent, the patient, also people that call in the navigators, trying to get a sense of how this program works, because right now it's a pilot. But if you are a psychiatrist in Maryland at a Hopkins hospital or University of Maryland hospital, or now Shepherd Pratt, we have these navigators available, and I can maybe put some information in the written part of this for people to call the navigators.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I can include that as part of the column post. Yeah, no, that's great. And it certainly takes like the administrative burden off of the clinician by having the navigator take on the bulk of that. When you have had the opportunity to educate people about ERPO laws, especially psychiatrists and other clinicians, have the conversations been well received? Have there been large questions or pushback?
Yeah, no, generally it's well received. Well, we're living in a bit of a bubble. Maryland's a very blue state.
Yeah,
So generally, even though guns are very politically valent, many people in Maryland, especially psychiatrists, tend to recognize the danger that guns introduce into a home. And so the idea of having a tool that can maybe decrease that danger in someone who might be suicidal is usually well received. However, I do travel the country and talk about these. Actually, just last Thursday, I was in Tennessee, where it's actually illegal in Tennessee to propose an ERPO law. They don't have one, and they've actually banned Tennessee, Oklahoma as well. So there's sometimes a little bit more, I guess, conversation about it. Maybe the thing that stuck in my mind the most, I was in Michigan talking about their law. Now, Michigan was one of the other early states to have clinician filing in their ERPO. So I went up there to talk to clinicians. And in this case, it was a group of pediatricians. And there was a pediatrician from the Upper Peninsula, more rural part of Michigan, who said, listen, I see the danger that having a gun in the house might be to the kids that I'm working with, especially if I have a kid who might be depressed. But if I were to file an ERPO on a family, the father has a gun, and that gun is taken away, especially like if it's near hunting season, she's like, there are 2 pediatricians in my community. And if I were to file that and I got on social media, there would be 1 pediatrician in my community.
Yeah.
She's
right.
like, I just can't do it. So it really depends on where you are. And obviously you want to work with the environment you're in. In her case, I recommend that she partner with a gun store, sort of like because they also recognize often the danger of guns. They don't want their guns being used in a suicide. And so she could sort of provide public education through those forums. But anyway, yeah, so sometimes there's pushback, but generally clinicians' only real worry is, am I going to have the time to actually file these things? Am I going to be legally vulnerable if I don't, which is a bit of a gray area. And so that's why these navigators kind of can come in and relieve that concern at least.
Yeah. Well, I can imagine even here in a blue state, like worrying about the disruption of your rapport, your therapeutic connection, therapeutic alliance with a patient who might be, really adamant about their Second Amendment rights. So
Absolutely.
Even here, if we were to utilize more often, I could imagine that being something that people would, ponder before they think about using it.
Yeah, that came up in the survey too. They were aware of the therapeutic alliance, and interestingly, people were more worried. People like pediatricians were more worried than psychiatrists, right? Who generally think therapeutic alliance, but thinking psychiatrists trying to build that rapport. And I think the reason for that is that psychiatrists are not new to this issue, right? We have to EP people sometimes. We have to involuntarily hospitalize. We have to sometimes med panel, So we understand the role of sometimes being more on that paternalistic side of the spectrum when there's lives at stake. Nonetheless, this is a new example of that. And so, it's always going to have to be a conversation, just like you have a conversation with your patients about when you might break the blind, terrace off issues, that kind of thing.
Right.
This is another conversation. And it's really, I want to say again, extreme is right in the name of extremist protection order. It's for extreme situations. If you're really worried that if you don't do this, this person might die or harm somebody else. And that's when you sort of invoke this tool.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Thanks for that. As you know, I provided some information about ERPO laws and the history, and then gave the link to the MDH, Maryland Department of Health flyer that sort of lays it out in a relatively simplistic way. So hopefully people will use those strategies. And then I will also include information about the new Navigator program too amongst the larger hospital systems for people to use and think about and have another tool in their toolbox when we are focusing on the most important thing, which is preventing deaths.
Yeah, I honestly think that this is one new way for psychiatrists to save lives.
Yeah, awesome. With that, we can end it. Thanks a lot for taking the time out, Dr. Nestad. It's always great talking to you and having you.
Yeah, great speaking with you too, Ron.
Excellent.
Thanks.